Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Adriana Galván. I'm the co-executive director of the Center for the Developing Adolescent at UCLA. I'm a psychology professor also at UCLA and dean of undergraduate education. And I'm so happy that we are here in conversation today. Earlier this year, the Center for the Developing Adolescent released 2 guides for practitioners and funders to help them incorporate developmental science into youth engagement programs in ways that make them meaningful and effective for everybody involved, including the young people. So today we're going to have a conversation about that with some great panelists who have been involved with the effort. But before we do, I want to give a few housekeeping notes. We'll leave time for questions in the last 15 minutes of the webinar. So you can add your questions through the Q&A through that. And then we'll forward them and answer them at the end. We'll be recording this panel discussion and we'll have it available on the website for the center after the session. So if you miss it or if you miss parts of it, please feel free to refer to that. And now I'm very excited to get started. And as many of you probably know who are on this webinar, during the adolescent years, which we roughly define as, age 10 through the mid-20s, we're learning rapidly from our relationships and opportunities around us. And we're learning who we are, who we want to be, as we increasingly are able to make real contributions to the world around us. And one way to do that is to engage in projects in our society and to engage with research or engage in community organizations. And this is a time when engaging young people in an organization can benefit everyone, including the young person, including the practitioners, including the researchers who are interested in a particular question. And youth can develop skills that they'll need to thrive as adults. And adults can better understand the young people they're working with. And so the goal of this, of these guides was to provide a framework and guidelines for improving the quality and relevance of the services that young people provide to the practitioners. We know that a lot of different organizations have been working to incorporate young people and youth voice into their work, but sometimes it's not always easy. What are the best practices to ensure that the young person is also getting meaningful experience from the interaction? And so to talk about how we can build meaningful and effective programs that engage youth in evaluation in ways that align with what we know about developmental science in young people, I am joined today with a great panel of experts by key people who have been involved in these guides. Report co-authors, Ahna, who's been the coordinator of our own Youth National Scientific Council, is here. Beatriz and Michael are both members of the Youth National Scientific Council on Adolescence. We're also here. And Jeff, who is the Associate Director with the Annie E. Casing Foundation, who conceived of this idea and supported the development, are all here. And I'm excited to be in conversation with you. So maybe I'll turn it over to them and let them say a little bit about themselves. And Ahna, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. My name is Ahna Suleiman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a youth engagement and adolescent development consultant based out of Davis, California. And I am really excited about this because I think people often get excited about the idea of youth engagement, and how to do it can be really overwhelming. And so I think that we have some really practical guides. And what I love is that we did collaborate with young people to create the content. I will pass it on to Beatriz.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So yeah, my name is Beatriz, and I'm part of the YNSCA, the Youth National Scientific Council on Adolescence. And I got the great opportunity to work on this guide with Michael and Ahna, and it was such a great experience. So a little bit about myself is that I'm 23 years old, and I graduated from Stony Brook University in May of 2020. So you know what year that was. So it's definitely been a different transition from college, from school to the adult world in a time of a pandemic. So that was an interesting experience. But another thing that I'm really passionate about is helping the community and being involved in the community, specifically in youth development. So my involvement in youth development with the 4-H programs of my county kind of led me on the path to being involved with the YNSCA and even through the pandemic, it's been a great experience to be involved. I've learned so much and excited to share what I've learned with others. And I'll pass it off to Michael.
Hi guys, my name is Michael Nguyen. Originally from Houston, Texas. I'm a current cadet at the United States Military Academy studying life sciences alongside diversity and inclusion studies. What led me to, I guess, originally join the Youth National Scientific Council along with Beatriz is same as her. I was involved in these different organizations that allowed me to develop into the person that I am today. And just being able to recognize that, I wouldn't have had as much of a sense of identity or pride in who I am if it weren't for these initiatives that my community undertook and provided for me. And so I wanted to be able to ensure that, my peers, especially other adolescents alongside me, got these same opportunities as well. I'll pass it off to Jeff.
Great, thanks. Hello, everyone. Jeff Poirier with the Anne E. Casey Foundation. Also really appreciative to CDA for inviting the foundation to be part of this panel today. I'm in our Center for Economic Opportunity at the foundation, which focuses on educational and economic pathways for young people and families. But that's a recent transition. I was formerly in our research and evaluation unit for about 7 years, and that's where I was when we worked with CDA on these 2 guides that we'll be talking about today. And really excited and looking forward to talking more about that and hoping to hear about how you all put them into practice.
Wonderful. Thank you all for that. And I have a lot of questions. So maybe Jeff, we'll start with you because you are originally the person who was really excited about this idea and really moved it forward. Why did the Annie E. Casey Foundation think that it was important to connect the science of adolescent development to youth engagement work?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, Adriana. And I think this is a really important and timely topic for a few reasons. And I think I'll start with a little background about the Casey Foundation for those who may not be familiar with who we are. But as you know, the Casey Foundation's mission is really to build a brighter future for young people, for children and youth. And we do that through a few core ways. One, by developing solutions that strengthen families. We also work to build pathways to economic opportunity. And then we have a body of work that's focusing on transforming communities so that they are safe places and healthy places for people to live, work, and grow. And really part of what the foundation is focused on too, and part of its values is strong research and data and how that can be used to guide the work that we do. And as we focus on understanding how a strategy is that we're investing in, how it affects the root causes of inequity, we want to understand that, and we want in the process of that to ensure that all young people succeed. So in doing this, we think it's important to support and collaborate with young people and who really are the experts in their own lives. So the Casey Foundation has had opportunities over the past several years to really learn from partners on the ground that are engaged with young people and really to understand how authentic youth engagement is showing up in their work and really the importance of meeting young people where they are and also approaching that through a developmental lens. And there's been a lot of work in the field, as you know, and Ahna has been involved in the Youth Scientific Council. So we saw this as a really prime opportunity to bring all those bodies of work together by working with CDA to produce the 2 guides.
Thank you. And we really appreciate the support and just the recognition that without the youth voice is really impossible or a half-hearted task at trying to address some of the issues that we want to solve about related to young people. So we've heard from Jeff, but Beatriz, could you provide and offer some insights into why it's important for organizations to involve young people in evaluating the very policies and programs and services that we provide for young people?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think for the programs themselves, there's so much valuable insight that youth can bring to the table. I think one example that I personally lived through of an area where this kind of went a little wrong was there was this activity. I was a part of a program and they did this activity with adults and the adults loved the activity, had great conversations. So they said, let's bring this to a youth group. And so they brought that same exact activity to the youth group. and it didn't really work. Right? People weren't really talking, they weren't really engaged, the youth were bored, and they didn't really like it and get anything as much out of it. And so when you're evaluating that program, it's not that the adults' opinions aren't important, right? Because for the adult perspective, it's great to see that, okay, for adults, this really worked well. But if you leave out the youth insight there, you would miss that whole aspect of how that didn't work so well for the youth group. And you wouldn't have that feedback to continue to improve that. So although, right, there was the best intentions there, but getting that valuable youth insight, that youth perspective, helps these programs and policies to continue to improve and get better. Once, you know, we all learn by making mistakes. So continue to get that feedback and learn. And also it's important to remember that not only for the programs themselves, but youth themselves have so many benefits to being able to participate in evaluation, right? They get the opportunity to take a part in something that's real, right? Be able to give meaningful feedback, be treated as an equal with adults, feel like they're really contributing and helping their overall development. So there are tons, and it's outlined a lot in the guide, but there's tons of benefits to youth as well as the programs and adults involved.
Yeah, and what I hear in what you're saying is that there's a mutually beneficial exchange, right? They each learn from each other. The adults may learn what's boring and resonate with young people, and people may, you know, learn how they can enact change. In this particular example that you gave, were the adults surprised about what the young people found boring or not resonating, or
Yeah, they were surprised because, and I felt bad because they really had a profound experience when they did the activity with themselves, and they loved it. It was so like emotional and great conversations. But trying to replicate that same activity, they wanted the youth to be able to have that experience, right? Like they had the best intentions. But you know, I felt a little bad that it didn't go as we planned, and there wasn't as much dialogue and conversation.
Yeah. But I think that you bring up a good point about intentions don't translate always into action or effectiveness in any program.
Absolutely.
Because it's obviously going to matter, and we're humans and we're social creatures who really resonate with emotion and feeling. And if it doesn't feel that way to you as whatever age group you are, then it's not going to be as impactful.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the guides are so helpful, because a lot of this is things that we might even know about, or we're trying to put on the best program that we can, but a little more like resources on how we can really guide that, how we can involve the youth hands-on in whatever capacity that we're able to at that moment. Those extra tips and tools is what really will take our programs to the next level.
Completely agree. And Ahna was so instrumental in helping to create youth engagement programs, not just in these guides, but the reason that we tapped her to be involved with this is because you have, Ahna, such a wealth of experience in working with young people, and in a way that's very authentic and resonates with what their experiences are. And you are also a scholar in adolescent development. So you are a perfect marriage of the skills that are necessary to provide guidance for other people who want to engage with this in their own work. So can you speak a little bit about how understanding adolescent development can be helpful in creating effective youth engagement programs? And why is it important to consider what we know about the developmental science in providing meaningful youth engagement?
I love that question, Adriana. Thanks so much for asking it. You know, it's interesting. I think just even in my own career trajectory, early on, I became really committed to youth engagement as a fundamental human right that everybody should be able to have participation and say in designing the world that they live in. And it became like a core value in everything that I did. And I think that as I continued my journey and thinking about things and became more interested in adolescent development, I really saw the added value that having a developmental framework for thinking about youth engagement could offer. One, I think that it's a really great way to help articulate what the benefits are of youth engagement. As we highlight in the guide, there's a number of key developmental tasks that happen during adolescence that have come out of sort of the work that the Center for the Developing Adolescent has done to frame the science. But we know that young people are really motivated to engage in risk-taking and exploration. They're exploring how to make decisions and regulate their emotions. They're also trying to make meaning of the world around them and find a sense of purpose. We know that they're highly sensitive to feelings of respect or disrespect, and they're very attuned to the role and the status that they have in their communities. We also know that they're building their skills to take other people's perspectives in a new way that they hadn't done before as children. And lastly, we know that it's really critical that during this time that they have support from adults who can be really effective partners for them. Mm-hmm. And youth engagement does all of those things. So one of the tools that the developmental science framework does is help us clarify like what the benefits are of youth engagement for young people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, the flip side of this is that the developmental science also allows us to be much more precise in our strategies around youth engagement. And so what it allows us to do, it pushes us to ask ourselves, it's not just that we want to engage young people. It's not it's not that just any young person is going to serve the needs of what we're trying to do with this program. We need to engage the right young people at the right time, depending on what our goals are. And the developmental science adds a really important and critical lens to understanding that. So it's asking ourselves those questions like, what are the demographics of the young people that we want to engage? Do we want them to be currently living this experience, or do we want them to be able to reflect on the experience in the past? Do we want to be, I think that the other thing that the developmental science does is it really also makes us think about, what does this engagement need to look like? How does it need to be structured and scaffolded and supported? What are the resources we're going to need? Who do we need at the table? Depending on the developmental stage, if you're working with fifth graders, the types of supports you need is very different than if you're working with a group of college students. The needs are fundamentally different. And it also gives us that important reminder to think about development is not just about age. There's many other factors that contribute to that. And so if we're working with certain populations that may have more accelerated development in certain areas or more inhibited development in others based on their life circumstances, we need to be responding to that. So for example, if we're working with teen parents, they are going to be accelerated in some developmental things, and they may also be restricted in others. Mm-hmm. Similarly, if we're working with something like unhoused youth, we want to make sure that we're really being intentional about what are the developmental supports we're going to need to be able to make the engagement a success.
I really appreciate how you're highlighting that not all adolescents are created equally, right? That we sometimes think that, we can just get a few adolescents to give us their thoughts. But certainly a 12-year-old is different from a 17-year-old. And that's just on age, right? That's not even considering individual differences or lived experience or culture, or all the things that we know inform brain development and experience and adolescent development. And that is, that's hopefully what these guides do is provide some context and explanation for why we simply, that we have to be intentional about who we include in these conversations and why. I wonder if, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you can offer some examples of when this goes awry, like when doesn't it work, or what harm can be done when we don't take these things into account?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I want to say, I don't know that it's necessarily harm. It's more like what Beatriz describes of just like lack of engagement. Yeah. I had a really wonderful experience where, very often, and the reason that we have both a funder's guide as well as a practitioner guide is that, very often, whether it's funders or practitioners, people get excited about the idea of youth engagement and they don't think all the way through the execution. So very often they'll have a convenient sample of young people. They'll invite a certain group of young people in of like, hey, this is just a group of students from the local neighborhood, or maybe it's a group of people that people know, whatever it is. And you start asking their input. And what often happens is that the young people who are engaged are not reflective of the young people who are actually being served. Mm-hmm. And that creates huge discord and actually leads to programs not being very successful. Mm-hmm. I've done this both globally as well as domestically. And very often we all know it's the like highly more educated, more, young people who have already had more opportunities, young people who already have like the ability to engage in adult spaces in pretty effective ways. They're often the ones who are invited to the table. And what that means is we're actually missing the voice and experience of those who we're trying to serve.
Yeah, that's a really great example about, intention doesn't necessarily translate into best practice. And so that's one of the reasons why the guide, we hope, will be so helpful for practitioners and funders alike. So Michael, we haven't had a chance to hear from you in this conversation yet, but I'd love to hear from you about some key things you've learned about how to involve young people in ways that are meaningful. What are some best practices that you would offer to benefit the organizations they're working with and the young people that they have recruited to work with them?
I mean, I think just benefits in terms of being able to provide for adolescents is a lot of the core sciences that the center itself talks about. That in our guide we do touch on, and how each specific task, correlates with one of them. A specific one, especially for adolescents, when we're in this age of in between finding our identity and being confused as to what our role in society is that, youth engagement gives us a sense of meaning and purpose, especially when it is organizations with a specific mission and task of, addressing issues that they face. The adolescents, when they're included in the proper, methods, can provide that feedback and can see the direct impact that it has in their lives, and that they can play a role, and that they can influence the impact. Just being able to, give that sense of autonomy, I think it really does help with us being able to form our own sense of identity. Not only that, I think just more superficial is, it gives us a sense of respect and social status. It incentivizes adolescents to engage more with their communities. And in turn, this just creates a positive feedback loop of continuing further engagement and further civic participation that, along the way allows us to be exposed to a plethora of mentors. I think the center really does as well with its current, evaluation practice of including us on the Youth National Council. We're exposed to, so many of the leaders in their field. We're able to observe, what characteristics in our own lives do we want to exude, participate in, and, what else we want to change about ourselves.
I think you make such a great point about how it's important and relevant now, but also in the future. And that's one of the key components of youth engagement, is to not only learn from them and hear about lived experience, but maybe for them also to think about setting up future interest in these issues that will always affect young people, no matter the generation or the era of young people that we're talking about. Beatriz and Michael, what propelled you to engage with the Youth National Scientific Council?
Yeah, so again, the opportunity from participating in 4-H programs in my county, which is a nationwide program, but in the 4-H program in my county, this opportunity, I heard about the opportunity to apply for it. And what's really interesting to me is this concept of youth development. And I never realized that there are scientists, there's people who are studying this full time and like really engaging into it. And what I was doing is helping in my community, specifically with youth development programs. So being able to, what really interested me about the YNSCA is not only being able to help and be a part of that youth development and youth engagement, but learning that science behind it, which has not only helped me in the YNSCA, but also bringing back to all the programs that I also work with. It's just been so valuable. And this guide especially like gave us an opportunity to dive a little deeper into some of that science.
Thank you for that reminder that not everybody realizes that there are people who get their lives and their careers studying this.
Yeah, and it's awesome. I definitely want to spread it, because I think a lot of people don't realize it.
Maybe you'll do it too when you're Michael.
I think for me, I found out what the center was through, as I said, like one of my mentors. that was able to witness just my own actions within our community and recommended that, I seek out this organization because they thought it would be beneficial for my case, because in engaging with the community and in learning about, our development as adolescents, what drives us, I'm also, at the other hand, a very logical person that wants to know the science and wants to know like the reasoning as to why am I acting the way that I am. And so I think just being able to enter a partnership with the center and how I'm able to provide my own perspective, but the center is able to provide me their extensive knowledge, that we're engaged in a sort of reciprocal relationship that both of us holistically benefits from each other.
That's great. Well, thank you. So Jeff, turning it back to you, you have a unique perspective as a funder or as part of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, a significant funder of youth engagement who has a lot of interest in this. What are some opportunities for funders in supporting quality youth engagement in investments that you make or the strategies that you take to ensure that this is a part of the work that your mentee or your grantees get?
Yeah, that's a great question, Adriana. I think, foremost, funders can think about how they can support organizations that are trying to build their capacity to either begin or grow their youth engagement work. So we can think about sort of direct investment in those nonprofit community-based organizations. We also can think about how we support capacity building. So that's partly why the Casey Foundation supported these two tools, because those tools will be helpful to supporting the work in the field. I'd say too that, we know that it takes a lot of thoughtfulness and intentionality to do this work. And in the context of research and evaluation, that's another space where we've been thinking about how to be more intentional with engaging youth. And as one example, we started up a youth research advisory about 1.5 years ago. And we've been working with 3 young people on a project that's looking at racial and ethnic identity and how that changes over time for young people with child welfare system involvement. And just an example of how this shows up in the work, because we say, in theory, young people can help inform the questions, they can help inform design, and they lead to better analyses and interpretation of results. What we're seeing is actually, we're seeing it happen in this project. So I think there's a real opportunity there for funders to think in the context of research and evaluation, how youth voice can strengthen that. And with that advisory, we are working on identifying local champions in communities, which are local young people, to help with recruitment and to help facilitate access to young people locally to conduct the interviews. And then I'll add to that, there are also opportunities to support the growth and development of young people themselves. I think that's another piece that funders can think about. And again, in the context of that project, one of the components of that early on when working with the young people was to develop what we call learning plans that were really grounded in what the young people themselves wanted to gain from that experience, so that it wasn't just transactional with the foundation just sort of bringing in youth voice and using it to inform our own work, but really also allowing young people to grow through the experience as well.
Thank you. I mean, that makes a lot of sense of why the Annie E. Casey Foundation would be interested in this work in particular, because it aligns so well with your mission that it precedes a lot of this work already. Ahna, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
I think that this is a really great question to think about opportunities. And, I think that Casey has been really at the forefront of thinking about how, as a funder, to integrate young people into their research and evaluation work. And I think that one of the things another opportunity is that foundations in general and funders in general are very adult spaces for the most part. And so there is a huge opportunity for foundations. I'm going to invite Jeff and others into this, for them to sort of walk the talk and think about, like, how do they also engage young people as partners in identifying what should be funded and what should be supported. I think that there are some organizations that are bringing together teams of young people to actually help with grant writing. There's definitely incubator hubs that are trying to help young people themselves who want to start their own organizations write grants. And it's great to have this bottom-up swell. And it would be really lovely to also see some of this happening from the top down, that funders also are opening up their space and looking at how they're making decisions in a way that partners with young people as well.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, exactly. And do you have examples of, well, maybe Beatriz, maybe I'll ask you, because you mentioned a little bit about an example of when this didn't work so well, or there was a disconnect between what worked with adults, but not so much with young people. Can you share an example from your experience of youth engagement that was done well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the prime example is the YNSCA. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here, I'm part of them, and you all know the YNSCA. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because the YNSCA, the CDA has this information, has this knowledge to do youth engagement well. So it's not surprising that that would be a good example. And I think one thing we were talking about a little bit before this webinar started was the youth engagement conference that we had over the summer. And that was a really great experience to not only get to be with the YNSCA in person for learning and activities together, but being able to participate in the conference with the adults, with funders, with practitioners, with the people that were invited at that conference. And that was very intentional youth engagement, but it was so well executed in that I know all of us felt like we were equals in that room, felt like we had a say in what was being discussed, that our opinions were being valued. And it wasn't that, oh, we just invited youth and they're sitting here on the side. Like, we were really fully engaged. So I think that was a great example of youth engagement.
And I'm not surprised. Ahna has just a way of making sure everyone in the room feels valued and a part of it and a good participant.
Absolutely.
Can you or Michael provide just one nugget of an example of a way that that environment was created in that conference?
Yeah, Mike, if you want to go after, I'll give you a second. But oh, you ready?
Yeah, so I actually don't think I attended that conference because I had something going on at that time. So.
Oh, right. Yes, that was unfortunate we didn't have Michael there, but definitely in spirit. But I think one of the aspect of the developmental science that really comes out in youth engagement and in even that conference and with the YNSCA is the support from caring adults. So it's a good balance of the fact that we're there at the table, literally being treated as equals, being valued, but also knowing that those adults are caring for you, like they're respecting you, they value you, like they want the best for you. And if any issues in your personal life or anything, like you needed help, like I know I could turn to Ahna for that. And so I think that support from caring adults is that balance of feeling equal to adults, but also being supported. And I think that's so valuable and really done well in the YNSCA.
And I think that translates to adults too. As adults, we want to be seen as adults and respected, but also seen as a whole person, which is what I hear you saying also. Absolutely. That not just someone who's contributing to the topic at hand or this particular program, but what does your experience bring to that? Or even, long-term experience, but also in the moment, what are you dealing with right now that may impact how you engage or how we want to engage with you? So I think that's such an important point. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
What about you, Ahna? What are you thinking? What are some of your best practices to work your magic with young people?
I just want to say I have immense gratitude. So thank you all for that reflection. This is a lovely part of my day. I think that there's a couple of things I want to say is one of the things that was super intentional about that meeting is that we didn't have a ton of time to do capacity building with all the invitees. So we were super strategic about which adults we invited to the table to make sure that we were going to be creating a positive, collaborative space for the youth. Now, if we had been inviting different adults to the table, we would have needed to invest time and energy and effort to do a huge amount of capacity building. And that's the point where I think it's an interesting intersection to sort of have this important dialogue about development, about funding, and about how we use these principles of the developmental science to create the most positive environment for youth engagement. I think that very often people shortcut, like they don't understand the depth of experience that is needed to be able to do youth engagement really well. I just had this experience recently where I was working with a wonderful, amazing team of academics who work on youth issues. They were super excited. They're super jazzed about young people. They all teach college, like they are experienced of working with young adults. And they said to me, we were planning a session that was going to be bringing young people to the table. And they said, I've got this. Like, we know what we're doing here. We've got this. And when we showed up in the room, I brought the young people to the table. They didn't have it. It didn't work. And in fact, like, it took that experience for them to have the humility to understand we may know a lot about young people. A lot of us have a lot of experience serving young people, and it's really different to step alongside them and partner with them. And so I think also when funders are thinking about making grants, they often sort of make that leap that if somebody is really good at serving young people, that of course they have the skills to be able to just do this. And often that doesn't occur. And so I think that investment up front and being able to, one of the things that I'm thinking about like right now is how do you have that frank conversation with folks so that they have the humility to understand and even the receptiveness to want to develop themselves as adults and professionals. I want to say for myself, the greatest benefit that I get or that I had working with the YNSCA members and also working specifically with Michael and Beatriz on these guides is I was learning all the time. So a great example was on the provider guide, when we started talking about evaluation, I had explained it a couple of times, and it wasn't until, I mean, we were pretty well into it when suddenly Michael was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is how I'm thinking about evaluation. And I think you're talking about something different. And it was such a critical moment for us to like, be like, oh my God, you are right. Like, I'm using these words that mean something to me, but they don't necessarily mean the same thing to you. And so how do we make this information accessible? And I think that whether we're talking about, this is like where the rubber hits the road with translational science, we have to be able to talk about things in a way that they're accessible and support people in using the information, or it doesn't do any of us any good.
That's right. And you said a word that we haven't used yet, but humility is so important, and learning. And both of those things happen, you know, with whomever's in the room. But it is so important to keep it in mind, because sometimes as adults, we get into this mindset that we have a broader framework or game plan that makes sense for everybody. And certainly working with young people reminds us that no, especially in these very changing times where we need to keep pace with it. So I'm going to turn to some questions that we have received, and hopefully we can offer some guidance there. One question is, what would you recommend for a practitioner who's trying to engage youth in a remote or virtual way due to social distancing and remote work? And I know that the YNSCA faces this issue when we first started meeting, because you know, obviously for pandemic related reasons, it was the only way to work together. So can any of you who've worked on the YNSCA remotely speak to that?
How about I start, and then Michael and Beatriz, you all could jump in.
Yeah.
You know, I think that this is a really interesting thing when we're thinking about adolescent development. And I just want to say this, like, we have adolescence is often this weird period of disembodiment that as young people go through puberty, they suddenly sort of lose their sense of like who I am in my skin. And that was amplified about 200% in Zoom.
Yeah.
So suddenly we took all of us and made us two-dimensional. So we had young people who are like, I don't know who I am in my skin, and now I'm going to be engaging virtually. And now we were inviting young people to engage like in a whole new domain with a group of young people they didn't know. Now, I know that many of you who have experience in this space have been there. And I think that we were just super intentional about how we wanted to create that. I think the other thing, what we did is we made sure that I did a lot of one-on-one sort of contact with folks before we brought them into the group. And that felt really important to me, so that everybody felt like I had a relationship with them before we invited them into a common space to build relationship with one another. The other thing that we did quickly is I think that as adults, we often need to follow the leads of young people and make sure that we are connecting with them on platforms that work well for them. So we went through a lot of different modalities. We tried Slack for a while, that didn't work. And what we did is, it's not like we tried to make a modality work. We worked to find the modality that the young people that worked for them. So not surprisingly, we ended up with a lot of our communication being on text. And you know what? I found out that if I sent a text, I could get responses from almost everybody, except for Michael, who had very big constraints on his time sometimes. That we could get a really fast reaction. We also changed our expectation. Like if I send out a text and ask for a response, sometimes a thumbs up or an emoji or something is all I need to know to move forward, rather than having like people write paragraphs. So just making sure that we were adjusting and responsive. And I'm going to say this wasn't without bumps in the road, for sure. There were times that we struggled to keep engagement. We struggled with any youth advisory board. Sometimes the pace of work ebbs and flows. And so we acknowledged that. I mean, one of the things that we did is we were super transparent, like, oh, sorry, we tried that. It didn't go well. Let's regroup. We also had regular check-ins with the young people, not only asking them about like providing input on whatever the activities were, but we also gave them opportunities to give us feedback on how the process felt. And we really quickly tried to integrate the feedback into what we did next. So those are just all some strategies. I don't know if Michael or Beatriz, if you want to add anything from your perspective.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say, and you mentioned it, is being intentional. So being virtual, there's an extra level of intentionality that you need to facilitate. So people aren't just having side conversations because they're sitting next to each other. Now you're on Zoom. So maybe, like Ahna said, being intentional about meeting one-on-one with people, or doing a breakout room, or doing, I know in our meetings, we do like a what's good with you, so we can update each other on our lives just in general. So we feel a little more connected, and those might happen casually in person, but virtually, you just need to be a lot more intentional in everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Oh,
I think practically from a youth perspective, speaking kind of selfishly too, but if it is a youth organization, I think it's important that, as Ahna said, like you accommodate for the youth and for their perspective, especially when it is in such a convenient location, like being online, such that they can be in any other place rather than just sitting in front of a screen. I think you need to create a sense of, I guess, urgency, sense of reasoning as to why they are there. And maybe this goes back to, finding meaning and purpose. It's like, is there a product or is there an impact on my life if I sit here in front of the screen and listen to these people talk? It's like, are my opinions going to be actually valued? And I think being able to show the youth that you're trying to engage that, yes, their participation does matter, and that their participation is going to directly lead to a change in their lives, creates, a further sensitization for them to have to sit there. I think my experience with the center, especially whenever, during our monthly meetings, when I would find out, that there was a chance for us to learn more from professors, all over the world that are a part of the centers, I was more inclined to just pay attention to these meetings because they were of a direct and great benefit to me.
Yeah, I think meaning and purpose is huge and so impactful. I think another thing the YNSCA did with meaning and purpose and like finding that connection is giving us at the YNSCA different opportunities based on what we're interested in. So connecting like the time constraints that everyone has and connecting what you're interested in to a project. And that's what we were talking about before, where adolescence, like it's not one size fits all. So having different opportunities and different engagement methods. So I know like we in the YNSCA, we did a podcast, we did an Instagram takeover. Michael and I worked on this project, and there's other projects that have been happening that are intentional to what people are interested in. Because if you're interested in it, you're going to put in, 110%.
that's exactly right. Yeah, so we have a lot of questions. I'll try to pick some of them. They're all interesting, but I'll pick some. And by the way, one of them is a clarifying question about what YNSCA stands for. It stands for Youth National Scientific Council on Adolescence, which is a part of the Center for the Developing Adolescents. Sorry for not making that clear. So one of the questions is for Ahna. Can you lean into the upfront investment a little further that you mentioned? Can you share some more examples of what this looks like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that this is a really important one, that it is important to have people move from this stance of being providers to young people to being partners with them. And people sometimes shift their language and their practices. And so giving them the support to be able to really think about, what does this mean? And this is like every good thing that we do in our lives. It often means about shifting existing power balances and also existing social norms. And so we need to be open. I say the reason that I love to work with young people is that they are upfront, just like Beatrice's example of like, if you start an activity and it is terrible, young people are going to tell you about it. And if you don't go ahead and actually decide to do something different with that information and instead just keep running with what you're going to do, you're going to lose the young people and you're going to lose the value. And I think that those are the places where we want to be very thoughtful about how do we provide training for our staff so that they're working in a responsive, dynamic ways. And I think that there's the lovely part is there are about a gazillion resources out there right now, training young people or training adults to be better allies and partners with young people. We have a very lengthy list at the end of our funders guide that you may want to check out about what are some different resources on how to do this well. But I do think that for me, it's really about this cultural shift. It's not just so much about you can train a lot. And I think that this is one of the things that I'm always thinking about. This is the art and the science. So we have a lot of science and we have a lot of evidence and a lot of toolkits and a lot of things that like tell us how to work with young people. But the spirit of it is really what you have to shift. And that's being willing to adapt. It's being willing to recognize that what you think may be right and what the evidence is pointing to is not going to be the direction you're going to go. I'll definitely make a plug for folks who are familiar with human-centered or youth-centered design. Those folks have been doing quite a bit to try to integrate young people to be co-designers of their space and environment. I highly recommend that you check out their resources. But I do think it is really about this way that you approach the work. It's about the essence that you have more so than what you're doing. It is important to do the right things for sure, and to design an experience that feels really authentic and meaningful to the young people and informs the work that you're doing. That's all true. And it's really about this, like, how do we bring everybody along on the journey of recognizing I'm going to have to give up power. I'm going to have to identify what domains young people have control over versus what I have control over, and being really explicit about that. And that takes time and capacity. And that's where the invitation also is to funders. They need resources to have the freedom to be able to do that.
And thank you, Ahna, for pointing Leah to and responding to her great question about how to establish a youth advisory board and some best practices, which is also included in the report. So I hope that that is helpful. The next question I'm going to ask is a very practical one that Elizabeth asks about what type of stipend or remuneration has been provided for the youth to honor their time and expertise that they're sharing.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, go, sure.
Or Jeff, did you want to go for it, Jeff?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was just going to answer based on the foundation's practice. So we do have a standard rate. It's something that had come up in the foundation the last few years because we're a large foundation and youth engagement was happening in different teams across the foundation, and folks were sort of making decisions about how to compensate young people in different ways. And we thought it was really important to have a consistent practice. And so we do have an hourly rate that we compensate. I think it's like $47.25 or something like that. It comes out to an even number over the course of a day, over 8 hours. But that's what young people are compensated for their time across all of our work. But absolutely, it's a great question, and it is important for young people to be compensated for their involvement.
And I will say that as far as I understand, this is a relatively new but long overdue practice of compensating young people or anybody who volunteers for any organization to be compensated for their time. So thank you for the question, Elizabeth.
Can I just also offer, Adriana, that I think that this is actually a really important thing to remember, that right now there is a wide spectrum of how people are compensating young people, and it also has to be responsive to the constraints. So for example, the YNSCA that was here, there are certain constraints that UCLA or the UC Regents have on how young people can be compensated, and you have to work within those.
Yeah.
I also work with organizations that are very intentional, and they just say, we pay young people $1 an hour. You know, you can decide, like, there's very much within that spectrum. Some people go for minimum wage. It also depends. Like, I want to say I want to acknowledge that there are times that there are constraints that you can't actually pay them cash. So instead you're giving them different types of remuneration. But I think that making sure that you're valuing their time is important.
Yes, agreed. Okay, maybe one last question. We've kind of gone through the hour pretty quickly, but how do you engage, this is from Caroline, how do you engage young people who don't see the value in evaluation and therefore are not as inclined to participate in engagement opportunities? And maybe what I read into the question is that they may not be positioned or in a life circumstance where they can engage, but maybe they want to. How do you engage those youth?
I have ideas, but I'm also happy to wait if others want to answer. So I think that this is really valuable. I mean, I think that one, it's sort of the answer is in the question, like, you have to help young people understand the value of evaluation and research. And one of the things that I think that I learned a lot from doing youth participatory action research is, you know, we do research and evaluation every day in our lives. You know, whether it's like using Yelp to figure out which restaurant we're going to go to, or it is figuring out what class we're going to take, or even if it's figuring out like who I'm going to hang out with at school, those are all processes of research and evaluation. And so I think sometimes this idea of research and evaluation can be super scary and feel very foreign. I always like to, when I'm talking with young people, and this is a little bit of a dated reference, but I always used to ask them, you know, what does Dr. Phil always ask people? You know, he's like, you ask people about their lives, they tell you their whole story, and the first thing he says is, so how's that working for you? And that is evaluation. So we want to reframe the opportunity so that it feels accessible. I also want to say that making a very intentional choice about the timing of when you engage young people, it may not be that they need to be at the whole process for the evaluation, but there may be really key moments, like developing the metrics and questions. What is important to young people that is really important? And so making decisions based on that can really sometimes strengthen the quality of the research or evaluation and create a positive experience for the young people. I also want to say that if you are successful at bringing young people to the table and creating a meaningful opportunity for them, they're going to want to come back. And I have never not seen that. Like, they're going to want to keep coming back. And then you can say like, oh, that was really awesome. Now I want to come back and I want to talk about this. You know, it's the same principles of any type of community engagement. You have to meet people where they are at.
Yeah. And what I hear and what you're saying is, like any collaboration and partnership, there's relationship building, right? Among adults, among young people and adults, all of that is about relationship building. And again, coming back to the whole person and valuing that. We're at time, and it is so sad to say goodbye to all of you, but I know we can have a lot more conversation around this. And luckily we already have the guide. So if your questions weren't answered, please refer to the guide. They have a lot of valuable information, and the guides were created by the people in this space right now. And so hopefully this was just a primer on the kind of information and insights that are provided there. And of course, if you have any questions, please reach out to any of us. But thank you for being here today, and we hope that you've gained some valuable information from it. Bye. Happy St. Patrick's Day.